centuries our castles lay forgotten in ruin. Our kind hidden in darkness. Until now. We will rise from the shadows. Their blood will become our power. Vampires will conquer the night and all who oppose us. Challenge my rule. Defy my reign and face devastation. Know my name. Fear my wrath. For I am Dracula.
Hello, this is Tim at Wembembo on everything from the Game Club pod, doing my first solo DLC episode. How exciting! We're going to be looking at the game V Rising, and for full disclosure, we at the Game Club pod received a review copy of this game for PS5. As the only one with the PS5, I took it upon myself to get this one done. So, again, just to be super clear, this one is a review copy. V Rising is a survival action RPG Diablo-esque game that released in 2024. It was developed and published by Stunlock Studios, and it was released for Steam, GeForce Now, PS5, and Microsoft Windows. It was released into early access in May 2022. And it got its full release on June 11th, 2024. A couple of things about the context in which I played this game. This game does offer a single and multiplayer mode, but for the purposes of this review, I played the single player only. From what I've read online, this game does have a pseudo split screen / shared screen mode for couch co-op on the PC version, specifically using something called the Nucleus mod. But obviously I couldn't get this to work on the PS5 version. I've been unable to confirm if this is an intended thing that's coming to PS5 or what. But for the purposes of this review, I'm not going to hold it against the game. What I did find particularly strange about attempting to get this to work, though, was when trying to accept the invite for the game that I was hosting, the player 2 that I had would just simply control player 1 at the same time as player 2. So it was like, you know, one arm fighting the other. Again, not holding it against the game because I don't know if it's an intentional feature or not, but it was a point of confusion for me during this. V Rising sees the player creating a vampire and fighting their way through an exceptionally large forest to get more power, as vampires have been essentially forced to the shadows and are now fighting back. The player can fight wild animals, packs of bandits, mythical creatures, and overworld bosses to gain blood and power, while building castles as safe havens in order to craft better materials and to gain other benefits from their blood altars that they have in the castles. There's a number of things that I really liked about V Rising. Aesthetically speaking, I thought its art direction was really interesting, in that the models that are used in-game are clearly quite intricate, but they're presented to almost have a low poly aspect to them. So you can see that each model is very, very detailed, but presented in a really nice, clear way. It makes for a really good silhouetting in the animations. It strikes a really good balance. From what I can tell, the server-based multiplayer aspect of this game is a really cool concept, in that the player's world will constantly run as long as the owner player is online. Again, I played the single player, so I'm looking at this from the outside, but from what I can see, as long as the owner of the world is online, people that they have invited to the world can just drop in and drop out at their leisure. Makes for a really nice cohesive bit of gameplay and for a good drop in, drop out experience for players. There's a lot of customization available to players for their vampire, both cosmetically and in terms of functionality. I didn't put too much time into the character customization myself. I just wanted to make a gross green creature, but I did use the random name generator and found that Nandor was an option. And as of What We Do in the Shadows fan, I'm choosing that this is a reference, and thus Nandor was born. In terms of functionality, however, vampires have weapons and tools available to them, such as swords, axes, maces, and claws. They also have spells that allow you to do actions during combat, like having an explosion trigger when you enter a parryable state, or shooting ice and fire projectiles depending on your selections. There's a lot of interconnecting powers that really allow you a lot of freedom and flexibility in your approaches to your fights and your builds. The vampire powers cover everything from self and group healing to transforming into different animals like wolves, and this provides a lot of utility when traversing land or navigating battles and just getting from point A to point B in really cool, utilized ways. Great thinking from the developer's part. Attacking certain animals like deer, wolves, and people will allow you to feed on the target's blood once their health hits a certain low threshold, so like it's maybe 30% or something, and you can begin to feed on that particular enemy or creature. At the time that this happens, the game will show you like, hey, feed on this character for this percentage of blood. The percentage is indicative of how pure the entity's blood is. And the more pure that someone's blood is, the better your resistance is to things like sunlight, because sunlight can and will kill you very quickly in this game. However, the blood is not forever, as you also use it to heal yourself when using your vampire powers, meaning you can't simply hold onto a high percentage of pure blood forever. You need to change your target type to constantly top up your blood, and some people may not have blood that's as pure as others. Equally, you can also pick up rats and destroy the rat to gain a full tank of impure blood. So while you'll be able to heal yourself, your resistances will be low. Changing creature, or even changing bandit types such as archer or rogue, will also offer you different blood types, which will give you different access to things like different ability variations, or even just increasing the strength of your abilities, again depending on the purity of the blood and the type of blood. Further to this, the purity of the blood also is connected to the sacrifices that you can make to the blood altar in your castle, allowing you to change how your upgrades unlock, or changing the progression of your castle. There's a lot of really neat, intricate, and interconnected systems in the blood system. It's very, very well thought out. While cutscenes in this game are kept to a minimum, they have a really, really unique art style in that it's almost a 2D puppeteered animation. Anyone that's familiar with old school Flash animation will understand what I mean by the models in these cutscenes use almost a skeleton to have linear movement with their different parts of their limbs. And that's not to say that's a bad thing. It's very well done, with some even having aspects of subtle cues about what's happening in the scene. One that comes to mind in particular is when you first see Dracula in a cutscene. You see him in a ruined castle, and after he emits this shockwave of power, the castle is restored, and the vampire hunters that are in the castle are blown back ever so slightly. They too are strong, but the shockwave is just slightly more strong. Finally, my absolute favorite thing in this game is the V-Blood system. The better equipment and powers that you have, the higher your level. And the higher your level you are, the easier time that you'll have fighting overworld enemies, everything from bandits to necromancers, stone golems, treants, and all the way to overworld bosses. Now, overworld bosses are the core part of this V-Blood system. Essentially, you'll have a tree in your menu that shows, hey, these overworld bosses are this level. You will find them matched in your skill level. You are stronger than them, you are weaker than them, and it gives you a very clear direction as to where to go in order to progress your vampire powers. The bosses will be named things like the Alpha White Wolf, or Lydia the Chaos Archer, or Grayson the Armorer, and killing each of these bosses will net you different rewards like spells and vampire powers, or simply just leveling your character or getting access to different equipment. Most of the time, you'll be using this V-Blood system in your in-game menu to track where they are, because you'll select your target and the game will point you in the direction of the area in which the boss is located. It's very, very clear. Essentially, it'll just splash blood at you from that direction. However, what you can also find is that you'll just stumble across these bosses in the overworld. So, for example, I was out gathering some resources for my castle when I found Lydia just wandering the woods, and while we were fighting, she was stronger than I was, so I had to use the environment to my aid. I remembered that I was in a place called Bear Territory, so naturally there were bears around, and I lured one into the fight who helped me a little bit, if only as a distraction while I healed. But then during the fight later on, an Alpha White Wolf appeared, who is another overworld boss. And while it initially targeted me as a player, because one of Lydia's arrows hit the wolf then changed its target to Lydia, helping me in the fight. This is all the while I'm dashing between rocks and trees and anything I can get behind to get an attack of opportunity, not like in D&D, just, taking advantage of positioning, or healing, or sending out projectiles, and just having this really dynamic, unique fight that I don't think I could have had anywhere else in the game, just because of the Alpha Wolf happening to spawn where it did. It was a really, really unique experience and a really gratifying fight to do as a result. While all this sounds really positive, there were a number of things I didn't enjoy about the game, and just to get the big one out the way, when I first heard about this game, I was aware that there was a survival element to it, but I thought the combat would be closer to a typical Diablo title, and unfortunately for me, it was a lot more survival crafting focused than I personally would have liked. The combat didn't quite scratch that Diablo itch for me. I kept on thinking, this is hinting at Diablo combat, and maybe much further down the line that'll come to fruition, but from what I played, I didn't get that. It felt Diablo light. For what it's worth, I'm naturally going to have a bit of a natural bias against survival crafting games. I'm just quite burnt out on them. So this isn't something that the game had done wrong per se, but I did have this perception of the game going into it that wasn't met, and if I'm honest, it probably dampened my experience because I thought I was getting one thing and I instead was getting another. Again, not the game's wrongdoing as such, but I feel like that could have maybe been presented a bit better in the marketing. On the topic of survival crafting, there is a lot of resource gathering in this game, but the game isn't particularly great at telling the player what the resources are for, or what even some resources are, or how long it takes to get those resources. I found myself particularly dreading going out to get copper, which is a really common crafting element in a lot of the recipes. Obviously, you can use things like wood to build a house, but I found that I couldn't build a roof to my house to protect me from sunlight until my walls had stone in them, which was several steps away in the objective system, which again I'll come on to in just a moment here. It meant that the base that I'd built with my tools like furnaces and sawmills and tanneries wasn't safe from daylight, which is a pretty strong obstacle in your day-to-day traversal of the map. My last big gripe with the survival crafting in this game is that the game would often show you recipes that you could use to get items that you need in order to build production buildings, for example, or an item, or to level up your castle. But you couldn't use the recipe without doing something else first, like defeating a boss that was further up the V-Blood tracking tree. For example, in order to build a stone grinder to make bricks for your stone walls and floor, which you need to build a roof, you needed to get whetstone in order to build this stone grinder. Now, the recipe for whetstone is shown in the furnace. You can also find whetstones in bandit camps, but your furnace does show you that you can make whetstones using stone dust and copper. So, I went out and found a lot of stone dust by killing a particular type of enemy over and over and over and over again, while finding copper, which I've already said I dreaded looking for because it takes a long time to mine, and it's kind of few and far between in terms of the ore deposits that crop up. only to come back to the furnace and be told that I can't use that crafting material without really giving me much of a hint as to how to unlock that recipe, despite it being there in the UI already. It was incredibly frustrating, and if it were me, I just simply wouldn't have shown the recipe until I'd met the criteria to use the recipe, like having defeated that boss. The game isn't exactly one to hide that you've unlocked something or progressed in a system, so why not this? Further to this, while there is an objective system, as I mentioned earlier, that will point the player to the next step in the in-game's intended progression, these are not explained very well at all. There is an area for combat tutorial, and after this combat tutorial area, you are placed in the main overworld of the game. And there are objectives that are there to guide you in things like building your base and crafting things. Therefore, I would consider these objectives to be an extension of the tutorial, as key system mechanics are locked behind them. For example, you can't access the V-Blood system or crafting systems without first having done some of these objectives. In this extended tutorial, I had to Google a ton of things as basic as how to craft a coffin, which is one of the objectives because the game doesn't explain how to build assets for your house. While it does tell you how to build the house itself in terms of the walls and the floor, it doesn't tell you that there's a separate tab that has now just been unlocked, having now gotten this objective, that allows you to build assets and amenities and functions for your house. It just kind of expects you to root around and find it, which would be fine, but this game is already kinda menu heavy and a little bit clunky to navigate on controller. The other major gripe I have with the menu system is that this game was very clearly built for PC first, and that's totally fine. I am primarily a PC gamer. No qualms with that. But if you're gonna move this over to console, I feel like you need to make some adjustments in order to cater to that console interface. The fact of the matter is, on a standard keyboard, you have 4 or 5 sets of rows of keys, several mouse buttons with loads of options to navigate, whereas on a controller, you're actually very, very limited. And I feel like the menus would constantly get tangled over themselves. Myself as the player, and it's not just me, I did also pass this controller over to my partner to try navigating the menu, and she too also found the menus to be relatively complicated on console. Again, I'm sure it's fine on PC, but I'm specifically looking at the PS5 version, and to me, there weren't enough adjustments made on the PS5 version of the game to cater to these menus. I came away with the feeling that I really should have tried this in multiplayer, because it feels like that multiplayer was the core focus of the game. Like, when you die in single player, or when you're downed, if you like, because you can get downed, but without anyone else in your server, you can't get picked up. It's little things like that that make me think that this game had primarily a multiplayer focus in mind, but then they don't allow for split screen couch co-op unless you're using a mod on the PC version. It just felt like a bit of an oversight. If I were to wrap up my thoughts on this, I don't think V-Rising is a bad game. I actually think it's a relatively good game. It's not my type of game. As mentioned, I'm very much survival crafted out, but I could see how someone could enjoy this 100%. I asked my partner what she thought. Again, she's very much a survival crafting player, but she found it clunky, she found it awkward, she found some of the building systems kind of difficult to use and not very intuitive. I think if they were to take another swing at this whole tutorial and explanation system, I feel like just going a little further to explain how some things work would go a long way with the player. It's about my thoughts on V-Rising. Thank you for joining me. Join us next time on whatever it is we're doing.